Hello, this is Jeff Johnson. I'm going to show you how to bring procedural lightning into your Unity app or game. I've created a prefab that makes this really easy, and this tutorial is an update and the latest and greatest. My previous tutorial talked about using scripting and copying and pasting scripts, which probably don't really need to do anymore. The prefab workflow is going to be much faster and easier, so I would say that is the new standard and best practice for this asset. So I hope this tutorial is helpful for you, and let's dive right in. I'm going to pretend I have this new Unity scene here that I need to get some lightning into. First thing I want to do is delete the directional light. I then want to change my camera to solid color and orthographic mode. Next, I'm ready to bring in the lightning prefab, which is in Procedural Lightning folder, prefab, lightning bolt prefab. This comes set up right out of the box ready to make lightning. There's only one thing you need to do, and that's to assign a source and destination object. This could be two objects in your scene, which will probably be the case for most of you, where you can just drag and drop a source and destination object or change them with a script. For me, however, since I don't have anything in my scene, I'm going to have to create a dummy object to hold the start and end. So let's create a lightning object. You'll probably want to do this in your scene. Let's create a start. Now remember, you don't need to create a start and end if you're going to be using existing objects in your scene, such as a sword or a hand as the start and an enemy or a wall as the end. But for me, since I don't have anything, I have to make these myself. Simply drag and drop or assign those in script, which I'll show you later on. Let's make the start -5, or +5, and then the end can be 5, well, let's do -3. I think my main camera is off by 1, so that's why things are looking a little funny. -4, or -5 and 4. There we go. -4. Great. So let's see what this looks like. Excellent. Now I am going to go ahead and add a sprite because I'm going to be demonstrating the lit up sprite. I'm going to be demonstrating how to use the light of the prefab as well. The lightning can actually emit point lights, so we'll use this sprite as to demo that in a minute, but just so I don't forget, I'm going to add him now. And let's see if we can find a sprite here. Got this rock sprite should do nicely. There we go. Okay, while I'm at it, this is great for you 2D users. You can see sorting layer, order, and layer. The lightning bolt when you're in 2D mode will also show that. So if you run right now, I'm not sure who's going to be on top or not. It's kind of a crapshoot. Now we got kind of lucky here and got on top, but depending on the order of things that could change. So there we go. Now the sprite's on top, which is what we don't want. So let's set him back to 0 and set the lightning to 1. I guess the higher numbers are on top. So if you want your lightning always on top in a 2D game, set that really high. Okay, so let's talk about configuration of the lightning. Now there's a lot of properties here. I'm going to go through them quickly one by one. Let's talk about camera mode. This is an advanced property that you should almost always leave as auto unless you are doing an orthographic XZ plane. If you're doing an orthographic XZ, you people know who you are. You'll need to change this to orthographic XZ. But for 99% of you, you can just leave it as is. Use world space will almost always be checked. This only applies for when you're using this in scripting. If you uncheck use world space, then when you use this in scripting, it expects your start and end objects to be relative to the parent. Almost always you'll want to leave that checked. Compensate for parent transform. If you've got complex hierarchies with rotation and scaling and your lightning is underneath and it's not appearing where you think it should be, check that checkbox and see if it fixes your problem. Almost always it will. If it doesn't, please email me and I'll try and figure out what's going on, but this checkbox should almost always fix any transform issues you're having. For most of you, you can leave the lightning on the root of your scene like I've done, and then that's a non-issue. But for some of you where the lightning is following a moving object or something complex, you may need to use this checkbox. Quality setting, use script, is again probably what you'll almost always want to use, but you can limit to quality setting if you want the lightning to detect if it's on a low-end mobile device or WebGL, and if that's the case, it will lower certain parameters that are more performance intensive, such as generations and light. So the light and the generations can potentially be very performance intensive, and so it'll turn those off on lower end devices, or lower the generations and turn off the lights. Okay. For most cases, though, you can set it to use script. I haven't found a real performance issue with the lightning. As long as you keep the generations to 5 or 6, it works on just about any mobile device. Okay, let's go on. The render queue is for advanced users who need to tweak when this shader runs. A -1 uses the default, and that should work just about in all cases. If you're a really advanced user, you know what to do with that. You can change that to change the render queue, but you should almost always never need to mess with that. Lightning material mesh is the actual material that does the lightning right here. It uses lightning bolt shader mesh. This is a shader I've spent a lot of time on that actually draws the lightning and billboards it and makes it look nice. You don't need to change that. The prefab comes set up with the correct materials. It's got a material, if your lightning doesn't have any glow, then it uses a shader with just one pass. If it does have glow, then this mesh shader uses 2 passes, one for the bolt and one for the glow. The lightning texture has a built-in default. You almost always don't need to mess with the texture because it's already set on the materials. But for kicks and giggles, I'll show you that you can actually change the texture at runtime. So let's change it to this star pattern here. Now my lightning's made out of stars. I've got quite a few textures in here in this folder. You can actually have some interesting effects here by switching out the textures. You can have your artist make you your own texture. The textures actually look better with higher trunk widths, so I will up that just for a minute here while I demo these textures here. Depending on that, you can lower generations and get some really cartoony, nice looking effects here. I'm going to keep this texture here just for the time being while I adjust all these other properties, and then I'll show you the lightning again without the texture, because I kind of like the look of this lightning. It's really cartoony, so we're going to make some cartoony lightning. The origin and destination particle systems, I will show you those in a minute as well. You can change the tint color of the lightning. Probably most lightning is white unless you have real crazy effects. I'm going to leave it white. Maybe yellow. Let's see how that looks. Maybe a kind of a yellowish, whitish tint. And the glow is blue is probably pretty good. The source and destination blend modes, there's really only 2 you'll want. Source alpha is almost always what you want on the source, but the destination can be 1 or it can be 1 minus source alpha, and those simply change the blend modes of the lightning. This is alpha blending here, and 1 is additive blending, which is the default and what you'll want most of the time. But for those of you who want a different look, alpha blending works. Okay, let's move on to jitter. You can see that the lightning is shaking a little bit, and as I increase the jitter, it shakes even more, which really, for me, the purposes of this cartoony lightning is exactly what I want. So let's just set it to 1 for now. Great, that looks awesome. The turbulence allows the lightning to move. So let's start ratcheting this up, and you'll see that the lightning is now moving in the direction that it's going. So I've got the start and end direction. The lightning's moving towards the end. I think we'll probably want this to, that's still probably too high. Yeah, that's pretty good. I kind of like that. You can also make it move to the horizontal plane, position. This is plus or minus. You can go either way. You can go up or down. And orthographic, you won't see the Z mode, but we'll leave those off for now. But you can apply a global kind of a wind almost using that turbulence velocity if you want it. Most of the time you can leave that off. Lightning spawn properties. Interval range is how long it's going to wait before it generates a new series of bolts. So if I set this to 1, every second is when the lightning will come out. If you want lightning to come out a bunch, then you can raise that. Now we're getting really close to this cartoony look with it that we want. We've got 100 to 200 milliseconds. It's going to generate 1 to 2 bolts. You can up this higher to get even more randomness. If you want 5 bolts every time, you can do that. I think 1 to 2 is probably the value you want. The count probability modifier basically says after the first bolt, what's the chance I'm going to generate another bolt? Once this fails, it stops. So if I set this to 0, it's only ever going to do 1 bolt. If I set it to 1, it's always going to do 1 to 2 bolts. If I set it to 1/2, then when it goes to do that second bolt, it's going to generate a number between 0 and 1. If that's higher, then it says no, you don't get a bolt, and if it's lower, you get a bolt. So here I'm going to have 1 bolt about a quarter of the time, and 2 bolts. No, 2 bolts about a quarter of the time, and 1 bolt 3/4 of the time. This is always 1 bolt. This is 50-50, 1 or 2 bolts. So a little bit of math there, but basically as you lower this value, the chance that it'll reach this maximum count bolts goes lower and lower. So you can see we're stuck here really low, not getting very many bolts. Alright, so that's quite a lot of bolts. Okay, so leave the count probability modifier as 1 if you just want the count range to work as normal. The delay range, so this basically says when a bolt is emitted, how long do we wait before it actually displays? So 0 means get that bolt going immediately, but you can raise this to different values. And you can see there it waited a full second before it started doing bolts. If you tweak the range here, you can get some very interesting staggered effects. You can even see lightning shorting in and out occasionally where there's no bolts. So this is great to play with if you've got kind of a random static discharge or something. You can also achieve the same effects using this interval range. So if I raise this, you can see lightning being staticky here as well. So play around with those. They let you do a lot of different things. Okay, trunk width range. As you change this, the trunk can get smaller and smaller or bigger. I guess that was 0. So we've got, probably want a trunk like that. That's pretty good. I might even go higher on the minimal side. There we go. That's looking pretty good. The one thing that I probably want is more lightning bolts, so I probably want to make the duration of each bolt smaller. In fact, even smaller than that, and I probably want the interval to be smaller as well. That looks pretty good. That looks nice and cartoony. You could imagine this coming from the sky and shocking the Roadrunner or something like that. That will even increase the count. So you've got kind of this nice cartoony lightning effect. We'll work on improving the effect even more down here. You've seen trunk width range, how that makes the trunk wider. The lifetime is an auto-destruct. Basically, if you need a one-time lightning and then you don't care about this object, set this to some value and it will destroy itself after that many seconds. Most of the time you just set it to 0. Generations changes how many line segments there are. So as this goes higher, you can see there's probably hundreds of line segments in there all the way to 1, which I believe only has 2 line segments. So I think I had it set to 3. 3 was looking pretty good. So that's pretty good. I really like the look of that. That is a good number. Chaos factor will spread the lightning out. so now it goes all over the place. Generally keep this smaller because if you go too high, the lightning goes all over the place. So I will leave it about there. Glow intensity allows you to give that outer glow brighter color. You can even spread it out wider. That's obviously way too wide. That's pretty good. In fact, I'll probably lower that intensity a little bit. Make it a little bit wider. Now that I'm thinking about it, this lightning probably needs a different glow color. Probably something reddish. White to red. That looks a little bit better. Kind of matches the lightning. Okay. There we go. Kind of a nice subtle hue there. Alright, so you can increase forkness, which makes the lightning shoot out more extra streams. That's quite a lot of forks. Probably don't need that many. You can increase the length of the forks. You can change the random length of the forks. So this is basically 0 to 1.43 added on to each fork. I generally leave it at 0.2. You don't want the forks going out too far. It looks kind of funny. Fade percent. When it's 0.5, the lightning spends half of its lifetime fading in and the other half fading out. At 0, there is no fade. I keep this small because a little bit of fade always looks nice. Growth multiplier, the lightning spends its full lifetime moving towards the end point. Or you can set it to 0, in which case there's no movement, no growth to the end. Generally a value in the middle looks pretty good. Alright, let's talk about lighting. You can see that I've got these light parameters here. The light range is set to 0 right now. But now as I increase that range, it's starting to light up that square back there. If you don't want the lightings, leave the light range at 0. I'll set it to 100 though. Just to show it off. But that's kind of annoying, so I'll leave it at 0. But in a 3D scene, this can make it look really nice, and I've got a demo scene with lights enabled that makes it look really nice. All of these are your standard point light Unity settings, so if you're not sure what they mean, go read up on Unity point lights and that'll explain to you what all these parameters are. Lightning trigger type manual means you'll have to call it in script. Uncheck that for automatic generation. Finally, we have some start and end variants. You'll see that the start is always pinned to the same spot as well as the end. This is a plus or minus value, so you can see now that the start's jiggling around a little bit, and now the end's starting to move around a little bit. Now the lightning's really going all over the place, which actually I think looks a lot nicer. You don't need to change the Z value in orthographic mode, so remember that you don't need that in orthographic. So now we've got some nice looking cartoony lightning. I think that's actually pretty good. You could consider lowering the generations once, but even then, in fact, I think this is, for cartoon lightning, really nice looking right here. So since I like that so much, I am going to, before I press stop here, I'm going to click this cog here on Lightning Bolt Prefab Script and click Copy Component. I spent a lot of time doing that and I don't want to lose my work, so now I'm going to click Stop. Had I forgotten to do that copy, I would be left with the default lightning, which would be very frustrating. But since I did copy it, now I can do the Paste Component Values operation, which sets up everything the way I had it before. And voila, we have our cartoony lightning. Alright, let's discuss particle systems, and then I think that will have covered literally everything here. So let's quickly make 2 particle systems. And we want end particles. I'm going to be doing these particle systems fairly fast. You generally want a small lifetime for these emission particles. Start speed's going to be pretty tiny. Start size probably also small, 1 to 3 maybe. You almost always want to use simulation space world for these because the lightning start and end can move around, in which case you don't want your particles to move around. 10 particles is probably too many. We'll emit from a sphere of a small radius. So let's just make sure our start particles are looking right. So let's drag start particles into the lightning origin particle system. Particle systems are great because you can tweak all of them during play mode as well to get it looking how you want. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good. I mean, you could tweak the start color to match the lightning a little better. But overall, I actually think that looks pretty good. If you want to make it appear on top of the lightning, change that order and layer. Now it's on top. I think the lightning was 999, this particle is 1000. So, I mean, it's quick. This is quick and dirty. You obviously can make a particle system that looks a little nicer than this, but for purposes of this demo, it's working pretty good. So I want to copy component, stop, and paste component values. So now I've done my start particles, and now I'm going to finish up with these end particles, which will probably just be like a sparky explosion effect. So let's go make all of these small. And the size definitely needs to be small for sparks. Change that to world space. Actually, if you're going to simulate it in the designer, you probably want to have it looping, and then the renderer sort mode needs to be 1000. If you're still with me, thank you for watching. We're very close to the end, so there we go. That looks like a pretty good explosion. I would probably change the speed to some minimum value. There we go. Okay. Probably want to emit from a circle instead. Actually, in orthographic mode it doesn't even matter. We'll just do a sphere. Let's assign those end particles. And I think we are ready to run and see how this looks. So there we go. We got particles flying all over the place. So right away I'm noticing we want to change the lifetime of these sparks to be smaller and change their speed to be smaller. And they don't need to emit so many. There we go. Now again, your artist or designer can make particles that look a lot better than this, but for my purposes they show you how to emit particles at the start and end points of the lightning. Okay, well, I think this about covers the tutorial. The only last thing that I would want to show you is this manual automatic mode. So let's put the lightning into manual mode. For those of you who need to write a script, I'll show you how to make that happen now. So let's go to this sum folder in your project and create temp script. I'm going to delete this when I'm done, but it's going to show you how this works. What's Unity doing? That was weird. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is add using digital ruby.thunder and lightning, and then you need a public lightning bolt prefab script lightning script. Go back to your scene, go back to your script, and wait for Unity to recompile. Now, I went pretty fast there, but we'll go over this one by one. Looks like my lightning script's not showing up properly. I think I need to save my files and rebuild the solution. Go back to Unity. There we go. Now it's recompiling. Drag the lightning bolt prefab on there. And when I click spacebar, lightning is going to fly all over the place. Lightning script.trigger. I think there's even an overload where you can specify the start and end point if you don't want to use those source objects, but for me I do. So in your game you could pass in a start and end point, but for me I'm just going to use the start and end object. So we've got the public lightning bolt prefab script lightning script, which is assigned. We have lightning script.trigger every time I hit the spacebar. So I'm not getting any lightning. I'm going to whack the spacebar. Lightning. So that's it. This is all you need to get this lightning into your app or game. I've gone through all the configuration options for the prefab. I've talked to you about performance and using custom textures and how to tweak the appearance during play mode. Ultimately though, if you have any more questions, email support@digitalruby.com and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Thanks very much, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.